Prepare what? Peroni wanted to know. Our defenses. You know as well as I do guns and Lewis Coffee aren't going to stop Randall if he gets here before we get out. She almost cracked a smile. Lewis Coffee was notoriously bad, especially to her Italian taste buds. If only I had a little more time, he said again. Well, you don't. Whatever you had in mind, you'll just need to wing it. She paused, her mind worrying, then said. If we don't get out of here in time. Do you have something that can help us? Nichols exhaled and looked away from her. Trapped here, cut off from help, that was the nightmare scenario he had so successfully put out of his mind ever since they had arrived. If only they had listened to him, they could all be away safe with Larry in the Vatican, safe from the Collector and on familiar ground. Father? Peroni pressed him. Do you have a plan if this all goes wrong? Perhaps. No. I don't know, he said to the floor, unable to meet her gaze. Before Peroni could press him further, her radio burst into life. Boss, it's Lewis. Even over the radio they could both hear the relief in his voice. I'm out front in the street. Everything's clear, and guess what? Jeff's car has just appeared at the top of the road. He should be here in a mo. Hope he's remembered my donuts. Over. Oh, thank God. Peroni's shoulders physically sagged. She raised the radio but didn't take her eyes off the priest. I want both of you inside. The moment he arrives, nothing has changed. We leave in 10 minutes. Out Roger diddly dodger that. Lewis out. She let her hand holding the radio drop to her side and she gave a slight smile at Lewis' unconventional radio manner. Under the circumstances she'd let it go. Hard and professional as she was, Nichols wasn't surprised to see she had tears in her eyes. I'm going to get us into the Vatican, he told her, even if I have to speak to His Holiness himself. He'll get us on the next plane back home, I'm sure of it. She nodded and tapped her shoulder holster. I'll hijack one if needs be, she said. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. He paused for a moment, desperate to say something to make amends for his inaction, but could only say, Anya, look, I'm sorry. No need, she replied with a shake of the head. I was more than a little panicked there myself for a while. But still. He was cut off as Lewis' voice came over the radio. Oh, shit, fuck me. Lewis, what is it? Peroni asked. Oh no way. Was all she got in response. Fear tightened Peroni's throat. She keyed the radio to speak but nothing came out. She exchanged a look of panic with Nichols. Anya, get him inside, now, Nichols said firmly. Lewis? Peroni finally found her voice. Lewis, what's wrong? Anya. Nichols moved forwards and gently took her arm. Get him back inside. She looked at him blankly and said. Lewis never swears. Something is wrong, he told her. Get Lewis back inside. Now. She winced at the sharpness in his voice and the indecision in her face fell away. Yes. Then into the radio. Lewis, get inside, now. But Jeff, Lewis said. Now, I said. The both heard the front door open then slam shut. A moment later Lewis appeared in the living room doorway, his face white with shock. He looked at them both, unable to speak. Lewis? Peroni prompted, her voice trembling. What happened? There was somebody in the car with Jeff. Strange. Jeff felt strange, like he was drifting through some kind of waking dream, or nightmare. Or would have felt strange, he suspected, if he could actually feel anything at all. Was feeling numb, the absence of feeling actually feeling at all? He pulled the car over to the curb in front of the safe house and switched the engine off. And in doing so had the nagging doubt at the back of his mind that in doing so he was in some way collaborating with the enemy. His clouded brain tried in vain to wrestle with the problem. He was on the good side, wasn't he? So why did he feel like a traitor? Jeff shook his head but it didn't clear. Strange, surreal, not quite with it. Any of these would do fine to describe his present state. His memory of recent events was fading fast. He tried hard to remember just what exactly had happened over the last half an hour that had led him to this point. Parked outside the safe house, that in itself was normal enough, he had done it countless times over the last few days. Nothing strange or surreal about that. It was just that this morning something was different, about him, about the whole world around him. But his befuddled state of mind couldn't unravel what it was. Jeff had never done drugs, he'd never even been drunk, but it was easy to imagine they both must feel something like this. I feel, he said out loud, but couldn't think how to articulate further. The shadow man in the passenger seat next to him summed it up better than he ever could. Discombobulated? Yeah, he replied, his lips feeling more numb by the second. That was as good a word as any. It's my new favorite word, said his passenger. Jeff rapped his knuckles on the steering wheel, quite hard, but what little sensation he had left was diminishing moment by moment. It was as if his nerve endings just about remembered how to register feeling, but that the memory was fading fast until. As he got out of the car and into what should have been the freezing early morning air, he felt nothing at all. Mind you, he counted this as blessings, as whenever he moved his head, the back of his skull where it was connected to his spine made the most alarming grating sound. He rubbed the back of his neck and suspected if his fingertips could feel anything, the back of his neck would feel jagged. For all his disorientation, Jeff's passenger was the only fixed point. The world was hazy at best, the sound muffled, but when the shadow man moved he was in sharp focus against the gloom. When he spoke it was crystal clear. In fact, hadn't it been the shadow man who had told Jeff to get out of the car just now? Just as he had told him to drive here, he also seemed to recall telling his passenger all about the safe house, who was in there and what protection they had. Normally he would have rather died than impart that information to an enemy, but something about the man made it all okay. He was a traitor, but that was okay too, as long as the shadow man was the one asking the questions, he was glad to answer them. Strange. The shadow man was the puppet master and Jeff the willing marionette dancing to whatever tune he called. He stood there by the car as the puppeteer got out and joined him on the pavement, and they both looked up at the safe house. Although now that he was here Jeff couldn't quite remember what was so safe about the place. And the faces of those inside, faces he once, not so long ago, called friends, were fading into the darkest recesses of his dying memory until they too would soon be shadows like his passenger. Best not to try and think too much, he told himself, so he waited there for the puppet master to tug on his strings. Then suddenly out of the gloom in his head came a flash of realization. He turned to the shadow man who was smiling. He seemed a pleasant enough chap to Jeff, and even though he hadn't been instructed to speak, he needed to voice the realization before he forgot it altogether. "I'm dead, aren't I?" "Sort of," came the reply in a soft American accent. American. Somewhere buried deep at the back of his fading mind Jeff knew that little fact was significant somehow. "I think the bastard's got Jeff," Lewis said breathlessly. He and Peroni looked at each other for a full 5 seconds, then, "Shutters," Peroni said sharply. "Lewis, you get the ones in the kitchen and dining room. I'll secure in here." "Right," Lewis' pale face flushed with purpose. "You sure you triple bolted the front door?" she asked before he disappeared. "Hell yeah," he replied, and then was gone. Peroni moved swiftly over to the living room's large window and with great effort pulled down the heavy steel shutters that had been installed throughout the ground floor for emergencies just like this. Once the latch clicked home, she threw the bolt across the lock, sealing it tight. She tugged at it to make sure it was secure, then satisfied it was safe, she pulled out her pistol from its shoulder holster and with cool efficiency chambered a round. "Very bad, very quickly," Nichols said, and she nodded. A moment later Lewis was back in the room breathing hard. "Secure?" Peroni asked. "As it can be," Lewis replied grimly, and seeing Peroni had drawn her pistol, did the same. "Poor Jeff," Nichols breathed as an empty feeling came creeping over him. He saw Lewis wince at the mention of his young friend's name. "This doesn't make any sense," Peroni said. "How in God's name did he find us so soon? And how could he have possibly known Jeff was with us? Could have been watching the house?" Lewis offered. "He could have called Larry from right outside." "True," Peroni had to agree, much preferring that rational explanation to any supernatural one. By the look on Nichols' face he was more inclined to go with the supernatural. "But then again," Peroni mused, "didn't he always?" "I imagine you can ask him that yourself soon enough," the priest said bleakly. "Jesus. What's with all the guns?" Larry came into the room lugging his hastily packed suitcase, to see everyone waving guns around. "Change of plan, Larry," Lewis told him. "We thought we'd hang around for a while." "Shite," Larry eyed the steel shutters. They made the place feel like a fucking tomb to him. "What's going on?" he said, nodding towards the shutters. "Randall is here," Nichols said, and Larry felt like someone had just kicked him in the stomach. "What?" He just managed to choke out. "And he's got Jeff," Lewis added. But Larry only had eyes for the priest. "Here? How?" "I don't know," Nichols replied with a shake of the head. "You don't seem to fucking know much anymore, do ya?" Larry said. Nichols didn't reply to the accusation. What could he say? This idiot was worse than useless, Larry thought, and was about to tell him so when Peroni stepped forwards. "Enough of that," she said firmly, then turned to Lewis. "Lewis, with me. Father, stay here with Larry." She moved to leave with Lewis, but Larry caught her arm. "Where the hell are you going?" "We have CCTV cameras outside," she said, snatching her arm away from Larry's grip. "I need to see what we are up against out there." And how Jeff's doing. With this she darted past him and out of the room. Lewis moved to follow but just couldn't stop himself. Now don't go anywhere, he told Larry and was gone. McCulloch looked at Nichols for an explanation, but the priest had his eyes closed, his lips moving as he silently recited what might have been a prayer. This made Larry's blood boil. Hardly a time for that now, Padre, unless you can miracle us out of here. But the priest ignored or didn't hear him. Fuck, Larry spat at the fool. Was it him or did the room seem to be getting smaller around him? In the kitchen, Lewis and Peroni huddled around the flickering black and white monitor which was connected to the cameras outside. On it was a TV show neither of them wanted to see, but still couldn't take their eye off. It starred their friend Jeff, who cut a solitary figure standing by the gate at the front of the house. He looked like a lost soul standing there and seemed to sway slightly as he looked up at the camera positioned over the front door. Jeff, Lewis whispered. He's alone, Peroni said, and tapped the keyboard hooked up to the CCTV system, and the picture flicked in quick succession from one camera to the next so she could see all around the safe house, but there was no one else visible on any of them. She stopped when the picture came to rest back on Jeff. But I saw someone, Lewis insisted. I believe you, but I can't see anyone now. She tapped a code onto the keyboard again and the screen split into 4 boxes each with a view from a different camera, all empty but one. See? I could have sworn. Peroni shut off the other cameras so the whole screen showed Jeff again standing forlornly by the gate. She felt a pang of guilt. It always seemed to be poor Jeff that got left outside in the cold, or sent on some errand or other. He was the youngest of them, so they had unconsciously made him the gopher. She drummed her fingertips on the table, chewing her lip. Maybe we should let him in? Lewis asked. She turned and gave him a look and didn't need to say a word. Okay, Lewis relented. But, it's Jeff Anya. I know, she said softly. Hang on, what's that? Lewis leant forwards and tapped the screen at a slight distortion of the picture next to Jeff, who kept glancing at it and mouthing something. Fault with the camera? Peroni offered. As they watched the distortion, it was clear now that Jeff was actually talking to it. Weird, Lewis said as Jeff silently chatted on. I wish this damn thing had sound. We were lucky to even get this set up, Peroni reminded him. The system was 20 years old at best, and that alone was testament to how their mission was regarded in the back rooms of Whitehall by way of the Vatican. As Peroni watched Jeff, something about him just didn't seem right, but at this distance and with the antiquated camera she couldn't make out what it was. She was grateful when Jeff opened the gate and began to walk unsteadily down the garden path and towards the front door, so at least she could get a better look. What's wrong with him? Clearly Lewis had noticed it too. What's that on his forehead? Wait a second. Peroni deftly moved a small joystick which controlled the pan and tilt of the camera and moved it so the camera tracked Jeff as he walked. Now he was closer, she could see what looked like a square piece of paper stuck to his forehead. What is that? Lewis asked.